In 1975, a 23-year-old janitor named Ronald Read opened a brokerage account with a few $100s. He never got a raise worth mentioning. He never picked a hot stock. He just bought boring companies, left them alone, and went back to work. When he died in 2014, his net worth was $8 million. Nobody knew, not even his friends. Most people hear that story and assume Ronald had some secret, a system nobody told them about. But the secret wasn't complicated. It was almost embarrassingly simple. So why doesn't everyone do it? Because the financial industry doesn't make money when you do nothing. That gap between what actually builds wealth and what gets sold as wealth building is what this video is about. And if you've never understood why the math feels like it should be working by now, but somehow isn't, that gap is probably the reason. My name is Alex, and if you've ever felt like you're doing everything right and still falling behind, pay attention to this, because the boring strategy is almost always the correct one. And I'm going to show you exactly why the conventional approach quietly costs you more than you think, and how a dead simple system turns $10,000 into $300,000 without requiring you to watch a single chart. Once you understand how compounding actually works at full speed, you won't make decisions the same way again. And it starts with something most people get completely wrong. What happens to your money when you believe doing nothing with it is the safe move? That belief has a price, and it's bigger than most people realize. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. The most dangerous financial mistake most people make isn't a bad investment. It isn't buying the wrong stock or trusting the wrong advisor. It's quieter than that. It's leaving money somewhere that feels safe while something invisible eats it alive. That's where we need to start. There's an image that's become almost a cultural shorthand for success. The guy on Instagram in the rented Lamborghini, the Miami penthouse in the background, the urgent pitch about asymmetric plays and high conviction opportunities. The algorithm loves that guy. It serves him to you at 11 at night when your guard is down and you're already feeling behind. And the feeling it creates that everyone else figured something out that you missed is completely manufactured. That feeling is the product being sold. The real millionaire looks nothing like that. Research on high net worth households consistently shows the same portrait. Modest house, older car, unremarkable lifestyle. Not because they're cheap, but because they stopped confusing the performance of wealth with the actual thing. They bought time and options. Nobody's filming that. But understanding the difference between those two pictures is just the starting point. Because before you can build anything, you need to understand what's already happening to your money right now, while you're reading about index funds and thinking about maybe getting started soon. This is where the rule of 72 becomes useful. It sounds like a finance textbook concept, but it's actually just a fast way to see your money clearly. You take the number 72, divide it by your annual return rate, and that tells you roughly how many years it takes for your money to double. At 8%, your money doubles every 9 years. At 4%, every 18. The math strips out all the noise and just shows you the trajectory. Now apply that to a savings account. Currently, the average high-yield savings account in the United States is paying somewhere around 4 to 4.5% annually. That sounds decent until you factor in inflation. This year, inflation is running at approximately 3%. So your real return, the purchasing power you're actually gaining, is closer to 1 to 1.5%. At 1% real return, the rule of 72 says your money doubles in 72 years. You'd need to live to be well over 100 to see that money actually works for you. And that's the optimistic version. A standard savings account at a big bank is still paying well under 1%. Subtract inflation, and you're not breaking even. You're losing ground every single month, quietly, automatically, without any drama to warn you. Think about what that actually means. Marcus is a 34-year-old project manager in Columbus. He's careful with money. He maxes out his emergency fund, keeps 6 months of expenses in savings, and feels reasonably responsible about it. What he doesn't fully feel yet is that his savings account is returning roughly 0.5% at his current bank. Inflation is at 3%. His real return is negative 2.5%. He's not protecting that money. He's watching it shrink in slow motion. That invisible loss is what I'd call the hole in the bucket. You work all day, you set money aside, you do everything you're supposed to do, and it still leaks out before you get to use it. Not because you did anything wrong, because the container itself is broken. This is the part most financial content skips. It's easier to talk about growth than to sit with the uncomfortable truth that inaction has a cost, not a dramatic, visible cost, a slow, compounding one, which, as we'll see, is exactly how compounding works in the other direction too. And once you accept that leaving money in a savings account isn't neutral, that it's actually a slow loss, the next question becomes obvious. So you move the money, you decide to invest, but now you're facing a different problem entirely. Because the moment most people decide to invest, their first instinct is to find someone smarter than them to handle it. Someone with credentials. Someone who does this for a living. That instinct is understandable. It's also where the math starts doing nothing for you. Consider what that instinct actually costs you. Not in theory, in dollars. Specific ones. The financial advisory industry is built on a compelling premise. These people study markets full-time. They have credentials, terminals, research teams, and decades of combined experience. If anyone can beat the market, it's them. That's the pitch. And it's a reasonable thing to believe, until you look at what actually happens when you hand your money over. The SPIVA report tracks professional fund managers against the S&P 500 index every year. This year's data shows that roughly 65% of actively managed large-cap funds underperformed the index, not by a little, just lost to a passive index that requires no manager, no strategy meeting, and no quarterly call. And before you think that's just a bad year over 15 years, not one of the 22 tracked fund categories managed to consistently beat the simple index. Not one. These are people with PhDs running billions of dollars, and the boring, unmanaged index beat all of them over time. Warren Buffett saw this coming decades ago. In 2008, he made a public bet, $1 million, that a plain S&P 500 index fund would outperform a hand-picked selection of elite hedge funds over 10 years. The hedge funds had every advantage: top managers, sophisticated strategies, access to information most investors never see. By 2017, the index had returned 126%. The hedge funds averaged 36%. Buffett won by a landslide, and his conclusion wasn't complicated. He said essentially that for most investors, a low-cost index fund is the best thing they can own. The greatest investor alive was telling you not to try to be clever. That's worth taking seriously. But here's where it gets personal, because it's not just about performance. It's about what active management actually costs you over time, even when it performs reasonably well. Take two investors. Both start with $1 million. Both earn 7% annually over 30 years. The only difference is the fees. Investor 1 uses a low-cost index fund with a 0.03% annual fee, basically free. Investor 2 uses an advisor charging 1% per year. 1% sounds like nothing. It sounds like the price of convenience. Investor 1 ends up with approximately $7.6 million. Investor 2 ends up with approximately $5.7 million. The fee difference is nearly $2 million, not taken all at once. Taken quietly, 1% at a time, every single year, while the advisor sends quarterly reports that make everything look fine. That's the thing about a 1% fee. It doesn't feel like losing $2 million. It feels like paying a reasonable professional for a service. The cost is invisible until you run the full math, and most people never run the full math. Now, to be fair, there are situations where financial advisors provide genuine value: tax planning, estate structuring, and behavioral coaching during market crashes. That's real. But pure investment management, picking funds, timing allocations, trying to beat the index, the data is consistent and it's not close. You're almost certainly paying for underperformance. So the logical conclusion is clear. Low-cost index funds, no manager, no performance fee. Just own the market and let time do the work. Here's where most people stop. Feel good about that decision and assume the hard part is over. But there's one more number worth confronting before we move on. If you take $10,000, drop it into an S&P 500 index fund today, and never add another cent, it takes approximately 41 years to reach $500,000 at a 7% average return. 41 years? For most people sitting here right now, that's the difference between retiring comfortably and retiring at all. The index fund is the right vehicle. That part is settled. The problem is that the vehicle alone, without fuel, moves too slowly to matter for most people's actual lives. which means the strategy isn't just about where you put the money or who manages it. It's about building a system, a boring, almost insultingly simple one, that keeps feeding the machine automatically, month after month, whether you're paying attention or not. That system is what actually closes the gap between 41 years and something that works within a human lifetime. The best financial systems are boring on purpose, not because boring is a virtue in itself, but because anything exciting enough to hold your attention is usually exciting enough to tempt you into making changes. And changes are where the math breaks down. The goal isn't a strategy you'll enjoy managing. The goal is a strategy you'll forget about long enough for it to actually work. So here is the system. 3 steps. Genuinely, that simple. Step 1. Open a zero-fee brokerage account. Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, all of them currently offer accounts with no minimum balance and no trading commissions. You can do this on your phone in about 15 minutes. There is no appointment, no advisor, and no paperwork that requires a printer. Just an account sitting there, ready to receive money. Step 2. Buy total market index funds. VTI tracks the entire U.S. stock market, over 3,600 companies in a single fund. VOO tracks the S&P 500, the largest 500 U.S. companies. Either one gives you instant, automatic diversification across the American economy. The expense ratio on both is currently around 0.03% annually. That's $3 per year on every $10,000 you invest. Not a typo. Step 3. Automate your contributions. Set a fixed amount to transfer from your checking account into your brokerage on the same date every month. Then stop thinking about it. This is the step that sounds too simple to matter and is actually the most important one. Automation removes the decision, and removing the decision removes the risk of making the wrong one. Now, if you're starting with a lump sum, say $10,000, the allocation matters more than most people realize. The instinct is to just put it all in immediately and let it grow. But that approach ignores 2 things: your psychological tolerance for watching it drop and the genuine value of keeping dry powder available when opportunities appear. Here's a structure that balances both. Keep 20%, $2,000, in a high-yield savings account as a true emergency fund. Not for investing, not for opportunities, for emergencies only. This is the buffer that stops you from selling investments at the worst possible moment, because your car needs a new transmission. Put 60%, $6,000 into your index funds. This is the growth engine. The money will compound for decades, but don't put it all in on day one. Instead, use dollar cost averaging. Invest $1,000 per month for 6 consecutive months. Same fund, same day, different price each time. Some months you'll buy when the market is up. Some months it's down. Averaged out, you'll pay a fair price and avoid the very real psychological damage of watching a lump sum drop 20% in your first week because you timed it badly. Dollar cost averaging doesn't maximize theoretical returns. It maximizes the probability that you stay in the market long enough to get them. The remaining 20%, $2,000, sits in a separate high-yield savings account, earning interest. Call it your opportunity reserve. This is patient money. It waits. When the market drops 10 or 15%, this is what you deploy. You're not trying to time the market. You're just making sure that when shares go on sale, you have something to spend. Within the 60% growth engine, consider splitting roughly 70% into broad stock ETFs and 30% into bond ETFs. The stocks drive the long-term growth. The bonds reduce volatility during rough stretches and give you something to rebalance against. This isn't a complicated portfolio. It's 2 funds. That's it. Recall the rule of 72 from earlier. At a 7% average return, your money doubles every 10 years or so. This system is what makes that math real. Not just a number on a page, but something that's actually happening to your account while you're at work, while you're asleep, while you're doing anything else. The system is now running. The money is moving automatically. The fees are nearly zero. The decisions have been removed. What happens next is the part most people never wait long enough to see, because compounding doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like much in year 1 or year 3 or even year 5. And that gap between where you start and where the math eventually takes you, that invisible stretch of patience, is where almost everyone gives up. Right before the compounding inflection point changes everything. Nobody quits a garden in spring. They quit in winter, 3 months before anything grows. That's the most accurate description of what happens to most investors between year 3 and year 7. The system is working. The math is running correctly in the background, but nothing looks like it's working yet. And that gap between the reality and the feeling is where most people make the decision that costs them everything. Let's make it concrete. Daniel is a 31-year-old nurse in Phoenix. He sets up the system from Section 3 exactly as described. $10,000 to start. $400 is added automatically every month. He picks VTI, sets the transfer date, and walks away. He does not check the account daily. He does not follow financial Twitter. He just lets it run. By the end of year 1, Daniel's portfolio is sitting at around $15,800. That includes his contributions and modest market growth. It doesn't feel transformative. It feels like a savings account that's slightly more complicated. By year 3, he's at roughly $28,000. He's contributed about $24,000 in total, so the market has added maybe $4,000 on top. Still not dramatic. Still doesn't feel like wealth. Year 5, $44,000. He's put in $34,000 of his own money over 5 years. The market has contributed about $10,000. If Daniel is being honest with himself, this is the moment that feels most disappointing. 5 years of discipline, 5 years of automatic transfers, and the number on the screen doesn't feel like it changed his life. It feels like a decent emergency fund with extra steps. This is the exact moment most people quit, and it's completely understandable. Human beings are wired to respond to feedback. We work, we get paid, we see the result. Compounding doesn't work that way. It works in silence for years, and then accelerates faster than your brain expects. The math is not linear, but our patience is calibrated for linear results. That mismatch is where wealth gets destroyed, not by bad investments, not by market crashes, but by rational feeling impatience at precisely the wrong moment. Daniel doesn't quit. By year 8, something starts to shift. His portfolio crosses 60,000, then 70. The monthly growth from the market starts to look less like a rounding error and more like a second income. He's still contributing $400 a month, $4,800 per year, but the market is now adding more than that on its own. That crossover, the moment when your portfolio's annual growth exceeds your annual contributions, is the inflection point. It doesn't announce itself. There's no notification. One year, you're contributing more than the market adds, and the next year, the ratio flips. And once it flips, it keeps going. By year 10, Daniel's portfolio grows by approximately $9,000 in a single year. He contributed $4,800. The market handed him the other $4,200 for free. His money is now working harder than he is. Every dollar he contributed in year 1 has been compounding for a decade. It's pulling weight he no longer has to pull himself. This is what people mean when they talk about money making money. It's not a metaphor. It's a mechanical process that takes roughly a decade to become visible and then becomes impossible to ignore. Fast forward to year 30. Daniel is 61. He hasn't changed the system once. Same fund, same automatic transfer, same $400 a month. His portfolio is sitting at approximately $760,000. He contributed a total of $154,000 of his own money over 30 years. The market contributed the other $600,000. He didn't earn that. He just waited for it. The math made him wealthy. He just had to stay out of its way, which is easier said than done. Because between year 1 and year 30, the market will drop, sometimes sharply, sometimes terrifyingly. And when it does, everything in your brain will tell you to do something, to act, to protect what you've built. Those moments, the ones that feel like emergencies, are the silent killers that can unwind 30 years of patience in a single afternoon. The market doesn't care about your feelings, but your feelings care enormously about the market. And that asymmetry between what the market actually does and how it makes you feel while it's doing it is the single biggest threat to everything you've built. Not fees, not inflation, not picking the wrong fund. Your own emotional response to a number on a screen is statistically more likely to derail your retirement than any external force. Here's what the data actually shows. If you stayed fully invested in the S&P 500 over the last 30 years and never touched it, your average annual return would be somewhere around 10%. Miss just the 10 best trading days over that entire stretch, 10 days out of roughly 7,500, and your return drops to about 6%. Miss the 30 best days, and you're down to around 2%, 30 days out of 30 years, and you've given up 80% of your gains. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between Daniel's $760,000 and a number that doesn't change his life. Now, here's the part that makes this genuinely difficult. Approximately 76% of the best market days happen during bear markets. Not before them, not after them, during them. When the headlines are loudest, when the news is worst, when your stomach is dropping, and every financial commentator on television is using the word catastrophic. That is precisely when the market stages its sharpest recoveries. And those recoveries happen fast. Fast enough that if you sold on a Tuesday, you can miss the entire bounce by Wednesday. Panic selling isn't irrational. That's what makes it dangerous. It feels like the responsible thing to do. It feels like protecting what you've worked for. The problem is that selling locks in your losses permanently, while the market's recovery remains available to everyone who stayed. Currently, the US market is navigating a particularly uncomfortable moment. The CAPE ratio, that's the cyclically adjusted price-to-earnings ratio, a broad measure of whether the market is cheap or expensive relative to history, is sitting at around 37 this year. Historically, anything above 30 signals that stocks are expensive, and a correction is likely at some point. Nobody knows when. Nobody knows how deep. But a drop of 20 or 30% at some point in the next few years would not be historically unusual. When that happens, and something like it will happen, it will feel awful. Your automated transfer will fire on schedule and buy shares at a price that feels terrifying. That is exactly what you want. You're not losing money when the market drops. You're buying the same assets at a discount. The investor who keeps buying during a 30% correction and holds through the recovery doesn't just survive the crash. They come out the other side wealthier than if the crash had never happened. The system from Section 3 is specifically designed for this. The automation means you don't have to decide in the moment when your judgment is worst. The opportunity reserve, that 20% sitting in savings, gives you something to deploy when others are selling. You're not just weathering the storm. You're positioned to benefit from it. Consider Ronald Read. He was a gas station attendant in Vermont for most of his working life, then a janitor. He drove a used car, wore a secondhand coat held together with safety pins, and brought his own lunch to work every day. When he died at 92, his estate was worth $8 million. He had never earned a high salary. He had never made a sophisticated trade. He just bought reliable American companies, reinvested every dividend, and never sold when the market got scary. He did this for 6 decades without interruption. Ronald Read didn't outthink the market. He outweighted it. And in doing so, he outperformed nearly every professional fund manager of his generation. That's the whole strategy. Not cleverness, not timing, not inside information. Just a boring system running automatically, protected from the one thing most likely to break it, which is you, on a bad day, making a decision that feels urgent and isn't. The question worth sitting with now isn't whether this works. The math on that is settled. The real question is what happens to your purchasing power if you wait another year to start, and whether the answer to that changes anything about what you do next. Here is what this all comes down to. Wealth isn't built by finding the right opportunity. It's built by removing the wrong decisions, the savings account that quietly shrinks, the advisor fee that silently compounds against you, the panic sell that locks in a loss the market would have erased by Thursday. The people who win this game aren't smarter. They're just harder to rattle. A few things are worth carrying forward. Inflation is always running. Question is whether your money is running faster. Fees are invisible until you do the math. Then they're enormous. The best market days hide inside the worst market periods. And compounding doesn't reward effort. It rewards patience, specifically the patience to do nothing when everything in you says to act. Take a look at your own setup. Where is your money actually sitting right now? What is the real return after inflation? If you have an advisor, what are the total fees? And has anyone shown you what that costs over 30 years? There's a deeper question underneath all of this that this video didn't fully answer. If the lazy system works so reliably, why do so few people actually stick with it long enough to see the inflection point? That's worth understanding.